The harsh truth is, most people don't care about your problems. And the few who do, they're watching how you handle them more than what you say about them. Every time you vent without intention, you trade your power for pity. But when you learn to hold your pain, process it, and move through it in silence, you become dangerous in the best way. This isn't about hiding. It's about mastering your mind before the world even sees you bleed. Stay with me. This might change how you show up forever. When we repeatedly speak about our problems without actively working towards solutions, we unintentionally create a feedback loop that strengthens the brain's negative processing networks. Every time a thought is recalled and spoken, the associated neural pathways are reactivated and reinforced. This is a fundamental principle of neuroplasticity. The more a circuit is used, the more efficient and dominant it becomes. By constantly talking about our difficulties, we engage the brain's stress circuitry, primarily the amygdala and related limbic structures, keeping ourselves in a heightened emotional state. This isn't just a psychological effect, it's a physiological one. Stress hormones like cortisol continue to circulate, reinforcing the emotional weight of the problem. Instead of dissipating stress, we're conditioning the brain to live in it. Over time, this can lead to chronic stress, emotional fatigue, and even identity fusion with the problem itself. What was once a temporary situation begins to feel permanent. And often it's not the problem that worsens, but our relationship to it. Verbalizing our struggles can initially feel cathartic, offering a momentary release, but repeated sharing, particularly without intention to resolve, becomes a rehearsal of suffering. The brain begins to associate talking with tension instead of relief. This is similar to strengthening a muscle, only in this case, the muscle is emotional reactivity. The hippocampus, responsible for memory encoding, pairs these emotional experiences with contextual cues, making us more likely to feel overwhelmed even in neutral settings. Over time, we build a network of triggers, places, people, or thoughts that reignite the emotional memory of the problem. The brain becomes biased towards scanning for similar threats in the environment, whether or not they actually exist. This shifts us into a chronic state of vigilance, exhausting our cognitive resources. Rather than creating clarity, chronic venting blurs our focus. It shifts the brain away from executive function and creative problem solving. In doing so, we trade empowerment for rumination. This pattern creates a dangerous illusion that speaking is equivalent to solving. In reality, they are neurologically distinct processes. Talking activates language centers and emotion circuits, but solution seeking requires activation of the prefrontal cortex, especially areas involved in planning and cognitive control. Without making that shift, we become stuck in a loop of emotional discharge without any functional outcome. This is similar to revving a car engine in neutral. The energy is real, but the movement is non-existent. Many people mistake emotional validation for progress, when in fact the brain treats them differently. Venting feels good in the moment because it releases dopamine and oxytocin, neurochemicals associated with connection and reward. But these chemicals don't fix the underlying situation. They soothe us just enough to feel better temporarily, but not enough to act. The result is stagnation dressed up as support. We confuse motion with momentum and sympathy with growth. The body and mind operate as a feedback loop. When the mind dwells in problems, the body responds with tension, inflammation, and stress chemistry. Muscles stay tight, the heart rate increases, and the immune system becomes compromised. Repeated exposure to this state leads to burnout, insomnia, and decreased motivation. It also shortens our window of tolerance, the zone in which we can think clearly, stay calm, and make good decisions under pressure. When that window shrinks, even small challenges begin to feel overwhelming. And when we constantly talk about our problems, we prevent the nervous system from returning to baseline. The vagus nerve, which regulates the parasympathetic rest and digest response, stays underactive. This prevents emotional recovery and keeps us primed for reactivity. Essentially, we teach the body that the threat never ends. The nervous system becomes stuck in defense mode, no longer able to fully relax or regenerate. Over time, this alters our baseline state of being. Instead of experiencing stress as an event, we begin to live in it as a trait. This isn't just a mental trap. It's a biological shift. Chronic stress impairs neurogenesis in the hippocampus, reducing our capacity to form new learning pathways. It also shrinks the brain's gray matter in areas responsible for emotional regulation. As a result, we become more emotionally volatile and less adaptable to change. These shifts in brain architecture are subtle but significant. They shape how we view the world, ourselves, and what we believe is possible. The more we speak about feeling powerless, the more the brain begins to predict powerlessness. These predictions aren't just thoughts. They become part of how the brain filters reality. Eventually, we see what we expect, not what is true. In this way, the verbal reinforcement of problems becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The habit of oversharing also distorts our relationships. When we constantly bring problems to others, we create emotional debt in the interaction. It teaches the other person to associate us with heaviness, which over time leads to social fatigue and disengagement. People may not express it openly, but they begin to withdraw, even if they care. Emotional bandwidth is limited. Just as we tire physically from lifting too much, we tire mentally from absorbing too much of someone else's stress. This withdrawal can be misinterpreted as rejection, which deepens feelings of isolation and further fuels the desire to vent. The cycle then continues. More sharing, less support, increased loneliness. This dynamic erodes both self-esteem and social trust. It also teaches the brain to expect less from others, further shrinking the social network. We are wired for connection, but connection must include uplift, not just unloading. To truly process emotional pain, the brain needs movement, either through physical activity or cognitive reframing. Staying stuck in verbal repetition without action is like replaying a painful scene on loop. It may feel active, but it's not constructive. Real healing requires activating different circuits, those involved in forward motion, purpose, and adaptation. This can include journaling with intention, setting goals, or using somatic techniques to shift emotional states. When we change the mode from expression to transformation, the brain begins to reorganize. It updates its internal model of the world, shifting from threat to possibility. New neural pathways begin to form that link difficulty with growth rather than helplessness. This doesn't require denying pain, it requires channeling it. The shift isn't from stop feeling to start solving. It's from stay stuck to move forward. There is a time and place for sharing struggles, but that time is best used when we have a goal in mind, understanding, clarity, or resolution. Venting without direction becomes emotional stagnation. Instead, we must train ourselves to notice the difference between processing and perseverating. Processing leads to insight. Perseveration leads to identity fusion with the pain. The distinction lies in intent. Are we sharing to gain clarity or to confirm our suffering? One empowers, the other drains. Intentional silence, paired with reflection and self-regulation, can often be more therapeutic than words. In that space, the nervous system has time to reset. The mind regains composure and clarity begins to emerge. Then when we do speak, our words are informed, measured, and constructive. They build, not burden. Ultimately, how we speak about our problems shapes how we experience them. Words don't just describe our reality, they define it. Repeated complaints become internal scripts. These scripts form the narrative that our brain believes, and the brain acts accordingly. If we say, "I can't handle this" often enough, the brain builds a model where that becomes true. But the same is also true in reverse. Silence, reflection, and deliberate self-talk allow us to reshape the internal story. When we stop telling everyone our problems, we begin listening to ourselves. That's where real change starts, not in external validation, but in internal recalibration. The work is not to suppress emotion, but to train the mind and nervous system to move through it with strength, not dependence. In doing so, we don't just feel better. We become stronger, not because the problem disappeared, but because we stopped feeding it. Beheading problems are shared. They must first be regulated internally. The nervous system is the first responder to stress, and when left unchecked, it drives our thoughts, speech, and behavior from a place of reactivity rather than clarity. Breathing techniques, cold exposure, and physical movement act as immediate tools to downregulate this system. These interventions shift the body from a sympathetic fight or flight state into a parasympathetic mode, allowing for calm and clarity. In this balanced state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and decision-making, becomes more active. When people speak without first regulating themselves, they tend to amplify the emotional charge of the situation rather than resolve it. This creates an unproductive feedback loop where sharing feels necessary but only deepens the dysregulation. To truly gain insight into a problem, the nervous system must first return to equilibrium. Regulation isn't avoidance, it's preparation. It gives us access to our full cognitive and emotional resources. A dysregulated nervous system doesn't just impact mood, it hijacks perception. In a heightened state of arousal, the brain filters information through a lens of threat and urgency. Small issues feel enormous. Minor setbacks seem catastrophic. This distorted lens affects the language we use, the tone in which we speak, and how others perceive our message. When a problem is shared from a reactive state, the listener receives not just the content, but the stress embedded in it. This can cause them to mirror that stress or withdraw entirely. As a result, we feel unheard or misunderstood, which further fuels frustration. The cycle continues. More sharing, less resolution, deeper emotional confusion. On the other hand, when we calm the body first, we create space between stimulus and response. This space is essential. It allows us to approach the same problem with curiosity instead of panic, with awareness instead of instinct. Regulation tools are not complex, but their consistency matters. The physiological sigh, 2 quick inhales through the nose, followed by a long exhale, is one of the most effective techniques for reducing autonomic arousal. It acts as a reset button for the nervous system, lowering heart rate and cortisol levels within seconds. Other practices, like nasal breathing during walks or brief exposure to cold, can signal safety to the body and restore composure. These techniques are simple, free, and neurologically effective. Once grounded, we can approach our problems with clarity and intention. The issue doesn't disappear, but our relationship to it shifts. We gain a higher vantage point. Instead of feeling consumed by emotion, we become observers of it. And from that place, true insight is possible. Sharing then becomes a conscious act rather than a compulsion. When emotional pain is raw, the instinct is to offload it quickly. This instinct is natural, but not always useful. Speaking in a dysregulated state can lead to impulsive language, blame, exaggeration, or victim-based narratives that do not reflect the fuller truth of the situation. The nervous system under stress is focused on survival, not nuance. In such moments, clarity is the first casualty. When we practice self-regulation, we create a buffer between experience and expression. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions, but allowing them to stabilize so they can be understood more accurately. Regulated people are better communicators not because they feel less, but because they can interpret and express their feelings with more accuracy. And this quality makes them more trustworthy and effective in relationships. Emotional safety begins with self-regulation. It allows others to feel safe in our presence and more open to hearing what we have to say. Clarity of thought is directly tied to physiological calm. Under stress, the brain's executive functions are compromised, making it harder to assess risk, weigh options, or plan ahead. This is why it's unwise to make important decisions or declarations while in an activated state. The body's chemistry does not support clear thinking in those moments. Once calm is restored, the brain has more access to logic, perspective, and creativity. Regulation widens the window of tolerance, the range within which we can think clearly while still feeling emotion. In this state, reflection becomes more honest and less reactive. We can distinguish between what happened and what we fear will happen, between what was said and what we interpreted. These distinctions matter because they prevent unnecessary conflict and internal misjudgment. Self-regulation, then, is not a luxury. It's a requirement for wisdom. Self-regulation also builds emotional resilience over time. Every time we successfully bring ourselves back to center, we teach the nervous system that it can recover. This builds confidence not just in our ability to handle stress, but in our ability to grow through it. Regulation turns chaos into challenge, and challenge, when framed correctly, triggers a different neurochemical cocktail, one that includes dopamine and norepinephrine, both of which support motivation and focus. In this state, we are no longer victims of our emotions, but students of them. Regulation doesn't mean we never feel overwhelmed. It means we don't collapse under it. We create internal boundaries between stimulus and speech, between discomfort and drama. This boundary is what allows us to face life with grace instead of chaos. Over time, it becomes our default mode. Another benefit of internal regulation is the development of discernment. Once the body is calm, we are better able to ask critical questions. Is this something that truly needs to be shared? If so, who is the right person to share it with? What do I hope to gain from sharing this? These questions elevate communication from venting to intentional connection. Without this pause, we risk oversharing with the wrong people for the wrong reason. Not everyone is equipped to hold our vulnerability, and not every moment is right for exposure. Self-regulation allows us to time our words and choose our audience wisely. It turns reaction into response. This is how emotional maturity is built. Not just by feeling deeply, but by expressing wisely. Often the biggest breakthroughs come not when we speak, but when we listen. To our breath, to our heartbeat, to the silence between thoughts. In that silence, the body recalibrates. The noise of urgency fades, and what remains is the core truth beneath the emotion. Many of the problems we rush to share don't actually require outside intervention. They require internal reorientation. This doesn't mean we face everything alone. It means we approach others only after doing our own work first. That work begins in the body. Breath is the bridge. Calm is the foundation. And once that's in place, our words become less about escape and more about expression. They carry purpose, not panic, and that difference is felt by everyone who hears them. When we speak from regulation, we speak from strength. Our words are less likely to be shaped by fear, shame, or projection. They are shaped instead by insight and responsibility. This makes us better leaders, partners, friends, and thinkers. It also helps us become more selective about what actually needs to be said. Many problems shrink in size once the body is calm. Some dissolve entirely, others simply become easier to manage. Self-regulation turns communication into a skill rather than a spill. It reduces emotional residue in our relationships and preserves energy for meaningful action. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. And that progress starts with knowing that our emotions are valid, but they do not always need to be vocalized immediately. They need to be understood. In a world that celebrates constant sharing, the ability to pause, regulate, and reflect is a form of quiet power. It doesn't suppress emotion, it transforms it. It allows us to carry our challenges without dumping them, to ask for support without losing composure, and to share with intent instead of impulse. It's not that problems should never be spoken about, but rather that timing, context, and intention must guide when and how they are shared. Speaking about challenges can be incredibly valuable, but only when the aim is clarity, direction, or problem solving. If the objective is merely to feel momentarily lighter by offloading stress, it often results in a cycle of emotional dumping without progress. Over time, this damages both internal resilience and external relationships. The key is to distinguish between emotional release and constructive reflection. When people consistently share without a solution-oriented mindset, they begin to associate expression with relief rather than action. This cultivates a habit of passivity and dependency on others for regulation. The real transformation happens when sharing becomes part of a deliberate process, not an emotional reflex. Before speaking, ask, will this bring clarity? Will it open a path forward? If not, the conversation may not serve either person involved. Not everyone is equipped to hold our problems in a way that promotes growth. Some people are naturally empathetic, but may lack the insight or structure to help us think clearly. Others may unknowingly reinforce our victimhood by validating our pain without challenging our thinking. In these cases, the conversation becomes a loop of shared helplessness. Emotional echo chambers may feel comforting at first, but they quietly erode personal agency. Instead, problems should be shared with individuals who are grounded, thoughtful, and capable of perspective. These are people who listen not to agree with your fear, but to help you rise above it. Their role is not just to sympathize, but to offer insight, ask better questions, and gently challenge limiting beliefs. Conversations with these people tend to leave us more focused, not more confused. They remind us that problems can be worked with, not just lived in. Choosing the right environment to talk about challenges is equally important. A loud, rushed, or emotionally charged setting can distort the communication and amplify the stress behind it. Timing matters. Sharing in the middle of overwhelm often leads to exaggerated framing and poor articulation. The nervous system in a stressed state doesn't prioritize nuance. It defaults to binary thinking. Everything feels urgent or hopeless. This can make the problem seem bigger than it really is, even as it's being described. On the other hand, a calm setting, perhaps after movement, stillness, or reflection, allows for more measured language and broader perspective. It's in this space that a person can begin to see patterns, identify their role, and entertain alternative responses. Speaking from this place transforms a problem from a weight into a working piece of information. It no longer owns you. You begin to work with it rather than around it. One of the most effective ways to determine whether sharing a problem is worthwhile is to identify your goal for the conversation. Do you want advice, reflection, accountability, or just a listening ear? If this is unclear, the conversation is likely to drift, becoming either circular or emotionally draining for both people involved. When intentions are vague, the mind seeks validation instead of resolution. Clarity of purpose empowers you to guide the conversation and to receive what's actually helpful rather than what feels comfortable in the moment. With intentions set, even a difficult conversation becomes easier to navigate. You're more likely to stay focused, avoid tangents, and maintain emotional control. This doesn't mean stripping away emotion. It means anchoring the emotion in direction. When you share from that space, you respect not only your time and energy, but the other person's as well. You become a steward of your challenge, not a servant to it. In some cases, the better path is to wait, to sit with the discomfort, regulate the emotional intensity, and explore the issue through journaling, self-inquiry, or movement before speaking. This pause doesn't indicate weakness or suppression. It's an act of emotional maturity. It allows the immediate emotional fog to settle, revealing deeper layers of the issue, motives, fears, patterns that might be missed in a rushed conversation. The delay also helps to sort out which part of the problem is truly external and which part is an internal story you've been rehearsing. When you do speak, you're more likely to articulate something useful and specific rather than a generalized emotional state. You bring coherence instead of confusion. What may have felt overwhelming becomes a clearly defined challenge. The conversation that follows is not just about expression. It becomes a collaborative act of transformation. Purpose-driven sharing also has a ripple effect on relationships. When you bring problems into conversation with composure and intention, others feel less burdened and more engaged. It signals self-awareness and respect, not just for your process, but for theirs. People are more willing to support you when they don't feel like they're absorbing chaos. Trust grows not because you never struggle, but because you approach struggle responsibly. This consistency turns you into someone others also seek when they need clarity, not to vent, but to gain perspective. It deepens connection through mutual respect and shared growth. Over time, relationships grounded in this kind of exchange become more resilient. They move beyond emotional codependency and into mutual empowerment. Communication shifts from being reactive to responsive, and challenges become a shared opportunity for refinement rather than a source of collective depletion. The brain responds differently to problems framed as threats versus those framed as challenges. When a problem is presented with a narrative of helplessness or despair, it triggers survival circuits and reduces creative thinking. But when the same problem is framed as a puzzle to solve or a test of character, it activates networks related to learning, motivation, and adaptation. This shift doesn't require dramatic reframing, just intentional language. Saying, "I'm being tested here," carries more potential than "this is ruining me." Words shape perception, and perception shapes biology. When we speak about our struggles from a place of agency, even if the situation hasn't changed, our relationship to it transforms. The nervous system calms, options begin to surface, and forward movement feels possible. Sharing in this way is not just emotional, it's strategic. It preserves mental energy and primes the brain for adaptive action. Another benefit of solution-oriented sharing is that it creates a track record of progress. Each time you bring a problem into conversation with structure and focus, you reinforce a growth-oriented mindset. You begin to see yourself as someone who not only feels deeply, but also acts deliberately. This identity is empowering. It transforms you from a person who's always dealing with problems to someone who's developing through them. This shift in self-perception is subtle but powerful. It shapes how you show up, not just in conversations, but in every part of your life. You become more self-trusting and less dependent on constant reassurance from others. Your words carry more weight, not because they're louder, but because they're more rooted. And others begin to notice not just your strength, but your intentionality. You become known not for what you endure, but for how you evolve. At its core, solution-oriented communication is an act of self-respect. It says, I am worth the time it takes to understand myself before I speak. Others are worth the clarity I can bring to the table. This kind of communication does not avoid vulnerability. It elevates it. It turns vulnerability into leadership, not the leadership of controlling others, but the leadership of guiding oneself. The reward is not just more effective conversations, but a deeper sense of personal alignment. You stop feeling like a passenger in your own life and start steering with more awareness. The people who consistently practice this become calm in crisis, clear under pressure, and capable of handling complexity without collapsing. Their strength is not in avoiding struggle, but in how they relate to it and how they speak about it. In every word, there is intention. In every challenge, there is a direction. Self-reliance isn't about isolation. It's about cultivating the ability to stabilize yourself before seeking external support. In a world that encourages constant sharing, there's great value in developing the inner strength to hold space for your own discomfort. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending you're fine. It means recognizing that not every emotional wave needs to be immediately verbalized. When you sit with your feelings first, you give them time to reveal what they're truly about. Often the first emotional reaction is only the surface. Beneath it lies a more nuanced truth. If you speak too soon, you may voice only the reaction, not the insight. But if you wait, you learn to extract meaning from emotion. This process builds inner discipline and clarity. You become more composed, more accurate, and ultimately more trustworthy to yourself and to others. There's power in knowing that you can face discomfort without rushing to be saved from it. The nervous system, when challenged appropriately, adapts and becomes more resilient. Each time you calm yourself in the face of difficulty, you strengthen your capacity to handle future stress. This is how confidence is built. Not through external validation, but through direct experience of your own regulation. People who are consistently looking outward for comfort never give themselves the chance to build that inner muscle. As a result, they may feel dependent, reactive, and overwhelmed by problems that could be solved internally. The ability to self-soothe, to reflect, and to respond from a grounded place isn't just helpful, it's essential. It puts you in the driver's seat of your emotional life. You stop outsourcing your stability and begin cultivating a baseline of inner control. And that control isn't rigidity, it's flexibility under pressure. Learning to hold your own emotions means you stop expecting others to do that work for you. This shift transforms how you engage in relationships. Instead of approaching others with silent demands, validate me, fix me, agree with me, you approach them with presence, perspective, and choice. People feel safer around you because your emotions aren't weapons or burdens. They're signals you've already examined. That doesn't mean you never ask for support. It means your support seeking is conscious, not desperate. You're not reaching out to be rescued, but to deepen understanding or connection. That difference is profound. It turns communication into collaboration instead of codependence. It also frees others to be more present with you rather than guarded against emotional overload. Emotional maturity, in this sense, is not about being unaffected. It's about being responsible with your affect. The practice of internal regulation also rewires how you interpret discomfort. Rather than seeing it as a problem to be solved immediately, you begin to view it as useful data. Discomfort becomes a signal that something needs attention, not from others, but from within. You start asking better questions. What is this feeling telling me? Where does it originate? What belief or need is being activated? This kind of inquiry opens the door to self-awareness that can't be accessed when you're constantly externalizing your emotions. Over time, this process develops a kind of emotional literacy, an ability to read and understand your inner state with precision. You stop drowning in feelings and start decoding them. And that decoding gives you agency. You realize that you can experience hard emotions without being defined or destroyed by them. They become part of your process, not your identity. Stillness becomes your ally in this process. In the silence between emotional surges, wisdom emerges. When you stop reflexively speaking every thought or feeling, you create space for discernment. That space is where integration happens, where the nervous system settles, the mind reorganizes, and the heart rebalances. People often think of silence as a void, but it's actually rich with signals and insights if you're willing to stay with it. This doesn't mean withdrawing from life or isolating yourself. It means refining your relationship with internal noise. You learn that not all pain requires a conversation. Not every discomfort needs an audience. Many emotional storms pass more quickly when you don't fan the flames with constant verbalization. Silence in this way becomes a strength, not a weakness. It allows you to reset and re-enter the world with clarity rather than chaos. Developing this internal resilience also makes you more selective about the people you open up to. When you've done the work of understanding your own emotions, you're less likely to throw them into careless hands. You begin to recognize that not everyone is capable of handling your vulnerability with care or depth. That realization doesn't make you cynical, it makes you wise. You choose your confidants with intention, not urgency. You share not to relieve yourself, but to enrich the connection. Conversations become meaningful rather than messy. Relationships deepen, not because you've dumped everything out, but because what you do share comes from reflection, not reaction. The people in your life feel honored, not burdened by your openness. And in return, they offer presence, not pity. This is how true emotional intimacy is built, on a foundation of personal responsibility and earned trust. There's also a shift in identity that occurs when you consistently handle your inner world with care. You start to see yourself not as someone who's always struggling, but as someone who is actively growing. Problems don't disappear, but they lose their grip on your identity. You are no longer the person with the issue. You are the person working through it. That subtle distinction changes how you carry yourself and how others experience you. People respect those who take ownership of their process. And more importantly, you begin to respect yourself in a deeper way. You don't need to perform your pain to prove it's real. You know it's real, and you know how to face it. That quiet confidence begins to shape how you walk through the world. It's not loud or flashy, but it's powerful. You radiate groundedness and others can feel it. Every time you self-regulate instead of self-dump, you reinforce a new neural pathway. The brain learns through repetition. With each moment you pause, breathe, reflect, and choose stillness over reactivity, you teach your system that you are capable of navigating life without chaos. This rewiring doesn't make you emotionless, it makes you stable. Stability allows you to experience a full range of emotions without being hijacked by them. It's not that you never cry, shout, or feel lost. It's that those moments no longer control your life. They pass through you instead of becoming you. This is the essence of emotional resilience, the ability to recover quickly and learn deeply. It's built one moment at a time in the small decisions you make about how to meet discomfort. In the end, the discipline of holding your emotions before sharing them becomes a kind of emotional leadership. It's not about never asking for help. It's about knowing when and how to do so effectively. It's about being the kind of person who first turns inward, processes, and then brings something of value to others. Whether that's a question, an insight, or a request, you become a lighthouse rather than a siren. Others begin to rely on your clarity, not just your honesty. And most importantly, you begin to rely on yourself, not out of pride, but out of deep trust. Trust that you are capable of sitting in the storm, finding stillness, and coming out with something more than just survival. You come out with wisdom. And that wisdom, practiced daily, becomes your quiet power.